Sometimes it's hard to, lose your franchise and then all of a sudden you're going to end up, not getting one forever. And like you're still waiting for one and all that. I mean, waiting's always the hardest part, but when you don't get it, you just don't get it. Trying to think of a football analogy is not that easy because, like, you know, Baltimore lost the Colts in Indianapolis, but it took them 12 years to get their team, the Ravens. For basketball, I mean, Kansas City, Buffalo, San Diego, those cities had NBA teams at one point or the other. And not in the 40s and 50s like the old days, but the 1970s and 80s, they had teams and they haven't gotten a team back. Heck, Vancouver, you can also say. For baseball, it's Montreal. It's easily Montreal. I mean, Montreal lost their team to Washington, who had waited 3 decades for another team that popped by. And that's what happens. Montreal wins. They don't have a team. And then you got the NHL. You got the fact that Phoenix now has lost their team to Utah. You got Atlanta losing 2 teams, both to Canada, in a sense. But of course, there's always the boom of Brass Bonanza. And that's the team we're talking about. We're talking about the greatest chance for the Hartford Whalers to make an impact in the NHL playoffs, the 1986 team. Hello out there, we're on the air. It's Cutter with NHL time. Tensions blow, the whistle blown, and the pucks go down the ice. Some teams just want to win the cup and do it with a smile. Hey, that is cool. Up on the River Nile. Oh, the good old hockey game. Who will come out on top? Will a team get through the cup to the cup by any means necessary? Oh, the good old hockey game. It's the best game you can name. And I'm have no shame. I will simulate those hockey games. Woo! So the Hartford Whalers started out life in the World Hockey Association, which was trying to tell the NHL you can't monopolize hockey. So, using the powers, they decided to have a team in this geographical area of New England, which included Connecticut, Rhode Island, Maine, Massachusetts, Vermont, a lot of the states in the Northeast that wasn't covered by anything. Nevertheless, the Whalers were decent. They had some good players. They ended up getting Rick Lay and Dave Keon and Larry Plell from the Toronto organization. John Garrett was there as goalie. The Whalers did okay, not the greatest WHA team around, but they did good enough that in 1979 the NHL, when they decided to expand by 4 teams, took the New England Whalers. They went to Hartford, and New England now had a home, the Hartford Civic Center. But unfortunately, that arena had to be rebuilt because of the snowstorm caving in the roof and all that. So they had to play in Springfield, Massachusetts for a while. Nevertheless, the Whalers actually had to change their logo because there was a harpoon in the New England thing and they didn't like that. So we saw the HW nowadays. The Whalers in their first NHL season made the playoffs, took on the Canadiens, and got blown out in 3 straight games when it was a best-of-5 series. But what's more important is that the Whalers had both Gordie Howe and Bobby Hull on their team. 2 legends of the game on the same team. That is unfreaking real. But it happened. It happened, baby. Gordie Howe's rights were secured by the Whalers after Houston folded, alongside Mark and Marty Howe. And then Winnipeg got rid of Bobby Hull to Hartford because he famously showed up late for a famous game with the Jets in their first season in the NHL. So yeah, you had Howe and Hall on the same freaking team. It's a dream come true because these 2 were original 6 rivals. Gordie Howe retired after the 1980 season after 25 years in the NHL. Bobby Hull kind of retired too. You know, it was like a piece, original 6 dying that day. The Whalers would do okay, but In 1986, they did well, which I will talk about. 1987, they had a chance to knock off those pesky Quebec Nordiques in the divisional round, but the Nordiques won thanks to a Game 6 overtime goal by Peter Stastny, getting revenge for what happened in 1986. The Oilers would plod along in 1990. They forced Boston to a Game 7 and fell flat at the Boston Garden. In 92, they put Montreal to a Game 7, but Russ Cornell in double overtime with a spin-around shot beat Frank Pietrangelo, who Hartford mortgaged a lot to get a proven playoff goalie. People did not realize that that was the last time the Whalers would be a playoff team in Hartford. Hartford tried their best, but they just couldn't keep up and all that. They were playing in a small market, and free agency was more all the rage starting to happen. The Whalers were okay, but in the sense that financially they weren't. I mean, their arena, the Harvey Civic Center, was situated within a shopping center and a hotel, if it seems. So basically, you could go to your hotel room, go down the lobby, and then you're at the Harvey Civic Center. Nevertheless, Peter Carmonas bought the team and assured Hartford that they weren't going to lose their team. Like many owners, like Norm Green, when he bought the North Stars just to put them to Dallas, he was lying. He had a deal with North Carolina, and it's like North Carolina with hockey? It doesn't make sense. Surely they could have put a basketball team in there. They did with the Hornets, but college basketball ruled North Carolina. They had Wake, they had Duke, they had NC State, and they had North Carolina. So, not getting too much into details with the hurricane stuff because I'll get to that once I do Carolina's what if. Carolina played a few years in Greensboro and had to, before Raleigh got the arena and all that. Carolina made the finals in 2002 and 2006, winning the latter. So let's take a look at the 1986 Hartford Whalers. All right, so the 1986 Whalers were fourth in the Adams division, and luckily they got to the playoffs ahead of Buffalo. They were 40, 36, and 4. They had to face the Quebec Nordiques, who were the Adams Division regular season champs, and were hoping to give Quebec a boost that Montreal just couldn't get. So anyway, the Whalers would beat Quebec before losing to the Canadiens in the famous Game 7. In the entry draft, Hartford, with the fifth pick, took Dana Murison. Was that a good move or not? I don't know. Because I'm looking down the list. Like, who they would have had? Alf Dolan was a good option. Dave Manson, Tom Shorsky in the first round. Yeah, the first round wasn't really the greatest, other than, Wendell. But he went number one to the leagues. Manson did okay. They took Kay Whitmore in the second round, a goalie who was supposed to be Hartford's star player, but then got traded to Vancouver. And Shane Shirla was a good player, but he was more of a penalty minute eater, if you will. Hartford traded Chris Kostopoulos to Toronto for Stu Gavin. Anyway, so yeah, that's their 1985 move. The roster in 1986 with such names like Dave Babbage, Sylvain Cote, Kevin Deneen, Ray Ferraro, Ron Francis, who was captain of life, Doug Jarvis, the NHL's Ironman at that time, Mike Liut, who left St. Louis for Hartford, and it was like amazing. He was a good player for LA, for St. Louis, and almost won the 81 Hart Trophy. Mike McEwen, Joe Quenville also was on that team. Alf Samuelson, Bradshaw, Sylvain Turgeon, and all that. They talk about the regular season and all that. They were 12-4-2 in their final 18 games, pushing them to the division and beat Buffalo by 4 points. It was actually a dogfight. They only were 3 points back in Montreal for second in the division. Quebec won the division and were hoping for everything. And the Whalers, the last time they made playoffs was their inaugural season in 1980. So they would face Quebec, Montreal would face Boston. Back in 1986, the first round of the playoffs was not best of 7, it was best of 5, meaning you had to win 3 out of 5 games. They changed it to best of 7 the next season. The regular season. In the playoffs, they took on the Quebec Nordiques, and everyone thought Hartford was going to get their asses handed to them by the Nordiques, but somehow Mike Liut made all the difference. Hartford had their star goalie, and thanks to him, He only gave up 7 goals in 3 games. And they scored 9 goals in game 3 against Quebec on CTV, mind you, with the great Dan Kelly with the call. The Whalers crushed Quebec into fine powder and got themselves into the next round against Montreal, who took care of Boston with their star goalie, Patrick Waugh. Well, he was a rookie. Hartford split the first 2 games with Montreal, but then they had to change goalies to Steve Weeks because of an injury to Liut. Montreal won game 3. Hartford won in overtime in game 4. Game 5 went to Montreal. So it looked like it was going to be game set match. Montreal was going to move on to the Stanley Cup semifinals. But Mike Liu pitched a shutout. And then game 7 happened. It was a 1-1 affair. Hartford had their chances. But in double overtime, Claude Lemieux walked down in front of the net. He did bump Mike Liu, but Liu was set to try to take the shot. And Claude Lemieux, who was a rookie, just like Patrick Waugh, flipped it over the shoulder of Mike Liu and scored. And the most famous moment from from the commentator's booth was the SRC or Radio Canada or CBC French stuff of Mario Tremblay, who was with the Habs at that time, but he was injured, so he had to be a color commentator. And his famous like ha woo, woo, and all that trying to he had to stay impartial, but he didn't. Of course, Mario Tremblay would make similar wooing sounds when Brian Screwland scored in game 2 in overtime in 9 seconds. So yeah, they crushed Buffalo. They were 50-50 against Boston, Montreal, and Quebec in a sense. So yeah, it was the first round. Quebec looked pretty good. They did reach the Wales final. The game went to overtime. Sylvain Turgeon scored. Leo did his job, and then game 2, Hartford won 4-1, and then game 3 was all that. Nordiques couldn't do it. And then they faced Montreal. So anyhow, yeah. I did all that. Leo did his job, and then game 7, Dave Babbage tied it, sending it overtime, and then 5:55 into the extra period. I thought it was double overtime when Claude Lemieux scored. But the Whalers just couldn't believe it. Kevin Dineen and John Anderson were both pretty good in the postseason. Yeah, Leo was 5-2. Weeks was 1-2. Leo won 27 games with that team. Yeah. They picked up John Anderson in March 1986 for Risto Siltanen. The Whalers picked up Doug Jarvis December 6th, 85 for Jorgen Peterson. They picked up Dave Babbage in November 85 from Winnipeg for Ray Neufeld. And they picked up Mike McCune from the Rangers for Bob Crawford. And Wayne Babbage from Quebec for Greg Malone. Peckham, the play-by-play guy. So yeah, the Whalers, this was their high water moment as the franchise before they moved to Carolina. So anyway, let's see what would have happened if the Whalers did take care of Montreal in Game 7 and gone to the conference finals. All right, so this is the series. They would take on the New York Rangers. The Rangers were basically a Cinderella of their own thing. I believe they were 4th in the division as well as Hartford. Yeah, they were 4th. And basically, the Whalers would have home ice because they had 40 wins. The Rangers had 36. So John Van Beesbrook came freaking out of nowhere to do well. And the Rangers remembered who the heck they were. So anyway, what would have happened Rangers Whalers game 1? It would be the Whalers 6-3 at the Civic Center. Ray Neufeld made it 1-0. Although I think Neufeld left. Stu Gavin made it 2-0. Brian McLeod and Pierre LaRouche tied it at 2. Stu Gavin scored 2 goals to get the hat trick. Brian McLeod made it 4-3. John Anderson made it 5-3, and then Glenn Hanlon came in the net for the Rangers. Dave Babbage made a 6-3 game set match. Billy Huber, Kelly Miller, Barry Beck, wow, Bob Burke, and George McPhee only playing like a minute each. Scott Clarendise, Torrey Robertson, Greg Malone, and Risto Siltanen not playing a lot. Gavin, McClellan, and Babbage, your 3 stars. Dave Babbage, how? Was it Sisticus? What did he do? I don't know. I don't know. Game 2. So the Whalers lose. They're up 3-1. Goals three. They're up 3-0. Everson and Kevin Dineen scored goals. It was 3-0, but Alf Samuelson got ejected for headbutting, meaning he was gone. So Hartford was down a defenseman, and Pierre LaRouche scored in the power play. Second period, Ron Grashner, Brian McClellan, and Rutus Lion scored to make it 4-3. No score in the third. Grashner, Deneen, Van Beesbrook, your 3 stars. Samuelson getting ejected was not good for Hartford, and it was probably the TSN turning point. Game 3 at MSG sees the Rangers losing to the Whalers in overtime. Pierre LaRouche and Sylvain Turgeon scored in that period. Morrison and Mike Ridley. Kevin Dineen made it 3-2 Whalers, but Bob Crawford made it 3-3, scoring on his former team. And then in overtime at 6:11, Tim Bothwell from Gavin and Ferraro. And not enough time for George McPhee. Troy Robertson. Leo, Crawford, and Ridley are your 3 stars. And maybe Leo deserved 2nd star. Managed. Game 4. So the Whalers beat the Rangers 6-5 to put themselves in a position to clinch. Pierre LaRouche made it 1-0 Rangers. Ron Francis tied it at 1. On a 2-man power play, Brian McClellan scored to make it 2-1. Stu Gavin then tied it. Ruotsalainen scored to make it 3-2. Gavin made it 3-3. And Brian McClellan made it 4-3. Evanson tied it at 4. Kevin Dineen made it 5-4. Sandstrom made it 5-5. And then Kevin Dineen made it 6-5. Another night for the goalies. Dineen, McClellan, and Francis, your 3 stars. Whalers are now 1 win away. And they get it. The Whalers take out the Rangers in 5 games. They waste no time getting rid of those Rangers. Dineen and Turgeon made it 2-0. LaRouche made it 2-1. Turgeon and Gavin made it 4-1. Ray Ferraro scored. Van Busenbeek was out. Deneen and Bothwell added goals in the 7-goal pasting. Deneen, Gavin, and Ferraro were your 3 stars of the game. And the Whale would be making the Stanley Cup Finals against the Calgary Flames, who I assumed had more points. We gotta change the home team to the Calgary Flames. Anyway, it was Leo versus Vernon. Yeah, by 5 points, Calgary had more points. So, yeah, Dan Quinn, Bozak, and Mullen. I don't know. I think Hagen Lube and then Bozak. I don't know much about Calgary's defense. Paul Reinhardt and Al McInnes were the main guys. All right, so let's go to the playoff. Game 1. Saw somehow 8 goals in the first period. Hartford won the game 7-5. So yeah, Mullen and Quenville got booted. So yeah, Mike Ferning got replaced by Mark Dalmore. Really? Yeah. Anyway, yeah, you see the 7-5 thing. It was 12 goals. It's hard to describe. Damore did pretty well in the net after Ferdinand. Ferdinand gave up 5 goals on 23 shots. Francis Ferraro and Otto, your 3 stars. The goals: Mullen, Suter, Gino Cavalletti, and Joe Otto with 2 for Calgary. Hartford, Al Samuelson, Samuel Turgeon, Ron Francis, Kevin Dineen, Ray Ferraro with 2, and John Anderson. Game 2. So another 8 goals in the first period as the Flames lose 7-6 as the Whalers are now halfway home. Yeah, 8 goals and all that. The Whalers won the game at 11-18 in third period. Ray Ferraro. So it was Babbage, Mullen, and Ebbison, your 3 stars. Goal scoring: Al McInnes scored once. Joe Mullen put up 2. Steve Bozak and Hawken Lou with 2. Hartford, Sylvain Turgeon with 1. Dave Babbage with 2. He's a defenseman. Ray Farrell, Dean Evanson, John Anderson, and Paul Wallace. Not related to Lucy. Some people say you should be. Game number 3 sees the Whalers beat the Flames 5-3. So the Whalers could sweep the championship. Deneen in the box for fighting Alonso Bourgeois, but it doesn't matter. Well, Neil Sheehy got a double minor for high sticking. His father, Tim, played for the New England Whalers. On the power play, the Whalers scored twice. Dave Babbage and John Anderson put the goals in. Steve Bozak made it 2-1 Flame. Lawless made it 3-1. Dean Edmondson made it 4-1. Then Deneen got ejected for charging, so that was bad. Paul Reiner made it 4-2, but Alf Samuelson scored to make it 5-2, chasing Fredden from the net. Gary Suter scored, but it was too little too late. Evanson, Liut, and Lawless, your 3 stars. Evanson. And then game 4, Calgary was basically done for. But they're going to put Reggie Lemlin in the net. He was pretty good. Maybe a change of goalie. Or not. As the Whalers win 7-1, Calgary was just basically down 3-0. They needed something. The Whalers gave them nothing. And the Hartford Whalers would have swept Calgary aside and gone on to win the Stanley Cup. Sylvain Turgeon scored 2 power play goals. Joe Otto got ejected for boarding. Tim Hunter had to serve the penalty. Charlie Bourgeois got ejected for headbutting. So the Flames were losing their heads. Otto and Bourgeois were out. Stu Gavin made it 3-0. Ron Francis made it 4-0. Sylvain Turgeon got the hat trick to make it 5-0 on the power play on another Neil Sheehy penalty. Yeah, Sheehy. Levelly was replaced Ferraro and Dana Marison for the Whalers. Al McInnes scored the only goal for the Flames. Moore tried what he could. Kevin Deneen actually got injured. I think that was Otto's fault. Turgeon, Liut, and Merson were your 3 stars of the game. Like Liut. Yeah, Lemlin, I think they wouldn't have nothing to do with it. I think that Vernon would, even with Vernon, Calgary just lost the spirit, and Hartford easily would have won the game. So the Hartford Whalers are your 1986 Stanley Cup champs. Who knows? Maybe based on that, they would have basically not relocated. Nah, I don't think so. Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond. I do.